And we look down at the start, and the players are lined up on the blue lines, and the lights are down and the spotlights are on. There will be a moment of silence, perhaps in an arena empty, and then a ceremonial puck drop that will involve a doctor or a nurse or some other hero or a virus survivor or sadly a virus victim's family. And then that heartening applause, if there are fans, or stick taps by the players, reserved for those who have sacrificed in a way that has nothing to do with sports. And then the introduction of the anthem, and I imagine the vocalist will have help from the crowd if there is one, and our professionals in the truck will show the flag and the singer and those nervous players.
Well, the NHL is kind of reviving itself since the last since the pause on March 13th. So it's reviving itself. Teams are starting to get back together. Phase 2 is starting to kind of revive itself, and the NHL is coming back, which is a good and a bad thing. But today we're joined back with Chris Johnston, who headlines on Hockey Night in Canada, and he's a senior writer for Sportsnet. So thank you so much for coming back on and talking with us about NHL.
Happy to be on. You guys are blowing up since I last saw you. So everywhere I see the podcast is getting some big guests. So I'm just honored to be one of them.
Thank you. So thank you. We came to you because we know you're big with Sportsnet. You know a lot. You write a lot of articles with Sportsnet, a lot about the NHL news and maybe surrounding the NBA, NFL, that kind of stuff. So we just kind of want to have an episode where we just talk about the recent news and just inside information.
You want to know what's funny? I just noticed. I'm surprised the NHL didn't go with potential markets. Like, I'm surprised they didn't just go ahead and jump on like certain markets that they knew might be like feasible for later on.
You mean in terms of to hold the games in, or?
Yeah, to hold the games to see if they have like a suitable arena and suitable for fans. I'm surprised they didn't jump on that.
Well, honestly, it's probably one of their biggest challenges, I would say. You know, it's a little different. Nothing has been easy in this for any of these leagues. So, it's all relative. But, I do think one advantage the NBA has is that they can have all of their 22 teams go to one place and set them up. And, in that case, that they've gone to Disney World. Because of the amount of ice the NHL needs, because the size of NHL teams is bigger, the roster size is more than twice, for each team what it would be for an NBA team. I think, it's made some of the logistics a little tougher for the league. And so they've identified some of those markets, Matt, that they've had an eye on. I think right now they're at about 10 cities that they're looking to potentially hold those games in. But they've been nervous to commit too early to any of those cities and then have, a virus outbreak in one of them. Or, obviously we've seen now some different kind of unrest, particularly in the U.S. cities. And so I think the league has wanted to be careful in how it goes about selecting the final two where it's going to hold those games.
And I honestly, this is kind of different from NHL news, but I really like that the NBA went to Disney because it does so. I feel like that hits really good towards the player. I think the NBA is players union, but it kind of strikes them so well because it's great for their families. And there's a ton of hotels in Disney. I mean, there's like 15 easily.
Right, and restaurants too, right? I mean, they kind of basically are taking over a campus area. Another challenge for the NHL is you can't build a hockey rink just anywhere. And so if they came somewhere like Toronto, which I do think is a possibility, the Scotiabank Arena is right in the middle of the city. It's hard to create.
It's right down.
It's hard to create that same vibe where people can move around comfortably because obviously maintaining some degree of a bubble is key from a health standpoint here to make this work. I mean, I can't think of much better than Disney. Just, there's golf courses there for the days off. I've heard that the players are going to be able to go and eat at various different restaurants outside. They got the hotel situation locked down. And obviously once their families get there, I'm sure the kids can go on the rides and do all the other stuff that Disney has to offer to keep them busy and happy too.
Yeah, I'm sure enough Disney, knowing Disney, they'll probably open a few rides that are easy to maintain because knowing Disney, that they're probably going to open up something like Space Mountain or something, because that's literally just an indoor roller coaster. So they're probably going to open up a few small ones.
Well, I would think. I mean, look, this is a big deal for Disney. I mean, we're all just saying Disney, Disney, Disney at a time when they can't really just open their doors like normal to their customers. I mean, it's keeping everyone front of mind. And, you know, Disney and ESPN are owned by the same company. So obviously there's a sporting/business interest at play here as well.
Yeah.
And at what point would you say, other than the virus just stops, or we find some sort of vaccine, would you say that the NHL would go to, you can play at your home cities? Like what point would they have to reach in order to say that?
Good question. You know, I think it's something, even for the playoff summer tournament, it's in the back of their minds. You know, what I can tell you is this. It's going to be 2 hub cities for sure, taking us through the play-in rounds and then the first 2 rounds of the playoffs after that. I think there's an outside chance, and it's far from a guarantee, that you could see the conference finals or the Stanley Cup final held in some of the host cities where teams are based. But you know, a lot of that has to do with what happens, with the virus, where those cities are. You know, I think the league wants to leave that possibility, even if it's just a small chance, because there's some appeal to that. But, you know, realistically, I think most people understand that this is going to be games played without fans and in sort of neutral sites.
And I think that as well. I think, again, like a lot of the times, I think that just travel costs in general might kind of have a kind of an aspect, kind of like a hint on that. And that some markets, for example, New York, are kind of worse areas than other. I think that they'd want to go, again, for 2 neutral markets and kind of hold it like a summer team to really test out. Yeah,
there's more certainty with having it in one place. You can kind of try to control that bubble. You can have the testing protocol set up. I think really what they're going to try to do, because there's going to be no risk-free way to do this. And that's the same for any of the sports that have started, like the Bundesliga soccer in Germany, the PGA Tour starting this weekend, the golf in North America.
I've seen a few Korean baseball games, and actually they've seemed to do a pretty good job at managing it so far.
Right, but there have been a handful of athletes in those sports that have produced positive tests. And I think that my point is that there's going to be some degree of risk here no matter what. And so what you're trying to do in making this work, if you're a league, is to limit the amount of risk, right? You want to make it as safe as you absolutely can, while knowing there's no way that to say 100% that no athlete is going to contract coronavirus or produce a positive test while they're in this bubble. And so I think that traveling between cities and all that, I mean, you're introducing, I think, more unknown elements, which is why ultimately I'd say it's likely, if the NHL is able to finish the season, we're going to see it do so in those hub cities.
Now, if they're with that element of risk, do you think there'll be any player or like a team that says we're not going to play, like a player that may say I'm not going to play with that element of risk? Like some players will not play because of that risk.
I think you will see that, and I can't tell you exactly who. I mean, there are players in the league that have underlying health issues, like Max Domi has diabetes, the Montreal Canadiens forward. Capo Caco, the New York Rangers, is in a similar spot. I'm not saying it will be those guys, but I think that the consideration, if you're someone with those underlying health issues, is different for the typical 20-year-old or 24-year-old player on another team. Because let's face it, these guys that play in the NHL are very low risk, both because of their age and their fitness levels, in terms of being at some grave danger if they do happen to contract coronavirus. But, I think between family issues, because, let's face it, there's I'm sure just with the number of players we're talking about and 2014's returning, that there's going to be some babies expected to arrive. Might be underlying health risks, not for the players themselves, but with their partner or someone close in their family. I just think with the number of players here, we're going to see a few that get excused. I don't think it's going to be a massive number. It's not going to be a whole team that says we're not going to play. Yeah. But, there will be some players that have specialized cases, and I think the league is understanding of that, and I don't think those players will be penalized for doing so, especially those with what we would call an acceptable reason for requesting not to play.
Yeah. And I'm going to kind of interject here. You were talking about players like expecting children and all that, and I will have to mention probably the one team that I expect that needs the NHL to open up for the players that they've signed for ELCs, I would say would be Montreal, only because you're guaranteed going to lose Max Domi to the risk factor of what if I get it. you're most likely going to lose Carey Price as well because, again, he's expecting his third child and he doesn't want to bring that home to his family. Montreal just released that, I think, like a day or two ago. And easily, if they do, their offense is going to be severely impacted. And they're most likely going to want to get Caden Primo up. They're most likely going to want to get Caulfield in there, and Romanov would be a big help for the defense. I think same would be for the Leafs situation. They want to get that young defenseman in there that they just signed.
Right, and some of that hasn't been decided. For example, Romanov, a player who spent this year in the KHL, and the league still hasn't decided if, when he signs, if he's allowed to play what's left of the 2019-20 season, or if his contract won't begin until the next season. And so, there's a few players in that boat. The Leafs won't actually be able to bring over Mikko Lehtinen for the end of this season. Let's face it, this is weird. I mean, right now this is a time right now as we're talking, guys. Usually the Cup final could be ending tonight. This is the time usually when the Stanley Cup is awarded, and we still don't even have for sure clarity that they're going to be able to finish the playoffs. And so the whole world is out of sync right now, and the league is still working through a lot of those issues about especially introducing new players to a team that didn't spend part of the season on the roster.
And speaking of the kind of going towards, like, teams have started to open up their ice and start allowing players maybe in groups of maybe small groups like 8 or 9 or whatever. And is that, would you say, a good jump or like a good kind of way to start getting those players on the ice and start proceeding with the playoff plan?
For sure. Some of these guys haven't been able to skate. I know a lot of the ones that were in Europe and parts of the U.S., the lockdown wasn't what we saw here, certainly in Ontario, where we all live, guys. But, some of these guys, just from a conditioning standpoint, have to get back on the ice and get several weeks of skating under their legs before they're in any position they feel comfortable playing meaningful games. But I think there's a hope element here, too. What we had this week is actual NHL players in actual NHL arenas skating. And yes, it doesn't look like normal. And yes, there's still a fair bit of runway here before even the season can be in a spot to resume. But I think it is a reminder that this could happen. And a team like the Toronto Maple Leafs, they have 21 players, I believe, that are skating this week at their facility. It's a good chunk of the team. There's still a few other guys that are haven't been able to come back yet and are worried about having to serve a 14-day quarantine where they can't do any activity, they can't leave their houses, and so that's why they haven't come back to Toronto just yet. But that's a good portion of the team back here trying to get ready for what would be a best-of-5 series with Columbus if this all goes off. And I sense, even in talking to John Tavares this week, that that feels like a more realistic carrot now that you're back in the normal environment and skating with some teammates and hoping that everything can be worked out here.
One thing that I would kind of like to interject as well, I think that you mentioned the 14-day quarantine. I think, if I've heard correctly, the NHL has been in talks with the Canadian government on. I'm not sure if there might potentially lift that for the NHL. I'm not 100% sure, maybe to make easier travel for Canadian markets. Maybe, I'm not sure, because I think they might want to get like a team like a hub city like Edmonton or Toronto, like you were mentioning.
Exactly, and I think, the NHL has had a lot. I know, in fact, they've had a lot of discussion with the federal government. It's not clear exactly how this is going to be, although I can tell you that I've heard some positive signs from the NHL side of things. I think they feel there's going to be some kind of concession made here. One way I've heard it described to me as a possibility is that the players are still considered in quarantine. They can come into Canada, they can be in their apartments or their houses, and they can be at the arena. That's included in quarantine. They can't go anywhere else. They can't go to the grocery store or do anything else. But maybe that's one way to get around the idea that athletes have to travel back and then spend 14 days not skating, not being in a gym, and all those types of things. Because let's face it, look across the country. A lot of influential players for the Canadian teams are American. You have Austin Matthews and Frederik Andersen of the Leafs are still in Arizona. Johnny Gaudreau of the Flames is back home in the U.S. You have Blake Wheeler of the Jets that's in the U.S. and a number of their other players. Brock Besser of the Canucks is in the U.S. All of these players are affected by that decision, and it's one I think we'll get some news on one way or the other here in the next few days.
I think another Canadian player actually is, I think Carey Price is in Seattle, if I've seen correctly, or he's close to the U.S. border. I'm not 100% sure. But
I think so as well. I heard that because he played for the Tri-City Americans in Washington State, and so I do believe that you're right, that he's one of the ones too that is in the U.S. And it's probably better, frankly, for those players to remain in the U.S., especially if they're somewhere where they have access to ice and to gyms to stay in shape until this is all sorted out before they go back to their playing cities.
Now, the last time we had you on was, I think, the beginning of April, so about 2 months ago, and that's when the NHL had no plans at all. They didn't know exactly what was happening, but now they've introduced, or Garrett Bevan introduced, a 2014 format, which they're going to play for in playoffs if that ever, presents itself. Is the 2014 playoffs acceptable to you? Like, yeah, that's a good idea.
I love it. And I saw all the hate. There's a lot of hate out there, and that's fine. I mean, look, everyone has a right to their opinion. I think we have to recognize this isn't forever. This is a very unique set of circumstances. And I think especially when you look at those best-of-5 play-in series, there'll be 8 of them, there's almost not a favorite team in any of them. I mean, the most lopsided one would be Pittsburgh, Montreal, the 5 seed in Pittsburgh in the East and the 12 seed in Montreal. Obviously the Penguins will be heavily favored, but you look at a lot of the teams, whether it's Toronto and Columbus, they had the same point total in the regular season. Vancouver and Minnesota are playing another one. They had 1 point separating them. I mean, basically, in addition to the fact that there's an unpredictability of coming back from this kind of layoff, you have teams that were largely the same type of team or had the same type of success before the pause kicked in, and now they're going to play each other right out of the gate in best-of-5s. I think that would be amazing. I hope we get to see it, leading then into the real playoffs. And let's face it, we've got almost no injured players to start. I mean, there'll be still a few guys that aren't able to return, but this will be the healthiest start to a playoffs that we'll ever see in our lifetime, just because of this huge gap in time between when the season went on pause and when the playoffs can start. And so I think all those factors, plus just, being a hockey fan myself and missing seeing the sport, I think will make this a pretty cool tournament if they can pull it off. And I think everyone has to maybe look past some of the inequities in it because it isn't entirely fair. I don't think there was an entirely fair solution, and embrace the chaos, because I think there'll be a whole bunch of kind of upsets and who knows what would happen. I just hope we get to see it, guys.
Yeah. Also, again, I just wanted to say also that in that lopsided Pittsburgh-Montreal series, Montreal has been, I think, one of the most injured teams this year, if I'm not corrected, because it seemed to be like a revolving door because, like, if, for example, Gallagher went out and then I think Tatar went out at one point, I think it was just like a revolving door of injuries. So if Montreal can get back to full strength and maybe Carey Price returns to playoff form, that should be a very interesting series.
Well, it's best-of-5. I mean, you don't want to say anything can happen, but anything can kind of happen. I mean, if they were to win 3 out of 5 games, even against a team that had a much better regular season than them and the Penguins, I don't think any of us could say that's impossible. Certainly, that's not how I view it. So you're right. I think anything can especially happen early in this playoff format. The other thing we can't measure is, which teams have actually been staying in shape, which players truly want to be back and which don't. I think that this has had a difficult impact on a lot of people, this kind of layoff kind of out of nowhere, and not everybody probably handled it well. I think that's just a reasonable assumption to have. I don't know who did and didn't because, it's been hard. I'm just sitting in my apartment too. I'm not seeing these guys and certainly can't go and watch the practices here as to get back skating. But I do think that there's just going to be an element of the unknown to this 2014 playoff that I think fans will really like.
Also, now, do you think the hate is coming from a little bit the advantage given to the top 4 teams in the conference from Eastern and Western? Do you think some of the unfairness is coming from that decision?
I think that's part of it, because Boston, for example, won the President's Trophy. They had by far the best regular season, where I think they had an 8 or 10 point lead in the conference when things were paused. And there's a chance they could end up as the 4 seed, just the way that initial round robin tournament works. I can get why people don't like that, but you have to remember teams like the Bruins and the Lightning, the Blues, Colorado Avalanche, Vegas, those teams on both sides in the top 4, they wanted meaningful games. They didn't want to just have a bunch of exhibition games while everyone else plays best-of-5, and then they have to jump right into a playoff series against those teams. And so, yes, it's unfair, but I think it was the only way to give a team like Boston the meaningful games it wanted to have, right out of the gate.
And I think also Tampa, that was kind of Tampa's point in their whole them rejecting the playoff format, that they weren't going to play. They were just going to jump into a playoff series against a team that already had been competing and already had kind of experienced at least some playoff hockey.
Right, and that was what they said was what happened last year when they got swept by Columbus, is that they had a historically great regular season, but they didn't have anything to play for from about February 10th on. I mean, they had already by far clinched the playoff spot, and they thought they lost a little bit of an edge by not having competitive games down the latter part of the regular season, whereas Columbus last year had to be tooth and nail to get in. Every game they played was a big one, and they were more ready for playoff hockey when it arrived. And so I think the Lightning players are having that still a little bit fresh in their mind, because that was such a disappointing way to have the 2018-19 season end for them, and so they voted against it. But it sounds like they are willing to live with what was decided upon, because 29 teams were totally in favor of this 2014 format.
Now, at this point where you see the format already set, everything is full set, like wildcard stuff, do you think any team has the up or the advantage going into playoffs?
Colorado's a team I think will be awesome to watch when it comes back. They first of all, they had a great start to the regular season. Much to Matt's point about the Habs, they had a number of injuries, especially as the year went on, and yet they were one of the hottest teams in the league when things went on pause. I like that they have a pretty young core, I think that those are the type of players that are probably going to perform well in this scenario, not just for the Avalanche, but I think the younger players are going to have some physical advantages over the older ones in terms of handling this long layoff. And so, I don't know if they have an advantage, because it's not as though the system's tilted in their direction, but I think they have a great chance to win a Stanley Cup right now, not just, in the future years, where obviously they're kind of trending towards being a perennial contender. But I also think that there's just going to be the chance for some team to get hot. Honestly, I think that you have to remember this playoff format, even though they've added sort of a fifth round to start it, it's all going to happen in just more than 60 days. I mean, it's going to be more of a compressed schedule, because what you don't have this time around is you don't have all the travel you typically have during the playoffs. So, there's going to be the occasional back-to-back within a playoff series. And so I think the idea of momentum and teams that get on a good run, could go on some crazy run and win the Cup this year. It might not be one of the favorites. I mean, the two best teams in regular season were probably Boston and St. Louis again. The two teams that played the Game 7 of the Cup final last June. But, I'm not sure it's going to come down to those type of teams, not to discount them by any stretch. I just wouldn't be surprised to see it be, a team like the Avalanche or someone else that's maybe flying a bit more below the radar entering the playoffs.
Another team I would kind of say that has an edge as well, maybe Vegas, if they get chosen as a hub city, because you can imagine they're probably already used to the area. They're probably still going to stay at home and just make the commute over to the arena, or maybe another arena close by.
Yeah, and I don't know how that's going to work yet. I've actually heard literally the two conflicting versions. Some people will swear to you the Western teams are going to be based in the East Hub City and vice versa, and others are saying that won't happen. I actually don't know what the decision will be. I like Vegas whether they're at home or not, though, Matt. I mean, getting Robin Lehner at the trade deadline, I think, really answered their one question for me. Marc-Andre Fleury has been up and down at times, and had some struggles this season. He went through the loss of his father, which I'm sure impacted the way his season went along. And so, to me, that's a team that's set up well for success. I mean, they've had success ever since entering the league, and on top of everything, a lot of their players stayed in the Vegas area throughout the pause. And I know that that's one of the cities where the local rinks open sooner, and I think a lot of their guys have not skating together like a practice. They've at least been on the ice a little bit more maybe than some other teams, and that could work in their favor as well.
I also you go ahead. Sorry, Brendan, go ahead.
I was going to say that Philadelphia was also a pretty hot team going into the pause. Do you think they may have lost that momentum, or could they continue to like have that momentum and just blow through the playoffs?
I think the momentum's gone. I hate to say it. I'm not certainly rooting against them, but they had so much working for them. I saw Kevin Hayes gave an interview with the Philadelphia Reporters. He even said as much. He's like, you get on that kind of streak, it's just tough to replicate that, and I don't know that they can fake it. It's not to say they don't have a good chance. I think Carter Hart, emerging as a real goaltender for them, it gives them kind of an answer to something, question that they've had as an organization for a long time. So I'm not going to say that they're not going to have a good playoffs, but I do think they're going to almost have to start at square one here when they get back skating in their rink and get through their training camp to try to rediscover that magic they had back in March.
Another team that I could see kind of gaining an edge as well, maybe Arizona, maybe, I don't know. I'm just kind of thinking that potentially, like the players that they have in the playoff experience that those players have, that they have picked up, Taylor Hall and Phil Kessel included, maybe some of those guys can step up and lead them. I don't know. That's probably one of the teams I can kind of see as like maybe like a team that's kind of under the radar.
Well, you could make some good money on that one if you put Stanley Cup bet on them. I mean, certainly they would enter as one of the lower seeds, but this will be the beauty of it. Because I'm not going to sit here and say you're wrong. Who knows? And
who knows at this point? Exactly.
Taylor Hall has never played. What's he played? One series of playoff games 2 years ago in New Jersey, and they went out, I think, in 5 to Tampa that year. So, for Taylor to get back and play meaningful games, and let's face it, Arizona was one of the teams that probably wouldn't have made the playoffs. I think they drifted too far. A couple
points out.
And so this is a lifeline for them. Same as Chicago. I'm not saying Chicago's going to win the cup, but they would scare me a little bit if I'm Edmonton facing them in the first round, just because Jonathan Taves and Patrick Kane, Duncan Keith, all the guys that have had success in the past, those guys thought they had no chance of making the playoffs, and just through the way this format's worked, they're getting a second life here. And again, it's only a best of 5 in the first round. I mean, that's why it'll be fireworks, and it's going to be 3 games a day per city. I mean, we're going to have 6 games a day to start at all hours of the day to make the times work. I mean, I think it would just be such a cool spectacle to see all that playoff hockey right out of the gate. Yeah,
that'd be some interesting summer hockey for sure, just to see 6 games a day.
I'm in. I'll watch all 6.
Could Florida also be in that kind of talk with the teams that are kind of underrated and people look over them? Because they do have superstars that could potentially get hot during the playoffs, but I don't know if they'd scare as much as a team as Arizona.
Well, what they could do, though, is Bobrovsky had such a disastrous season, right?
Yeah.
I have to think someone like that might actually benefit from the pause, because it's literally a chance to start fresh. And in his case, he never got off on the right foot with the Panthers. I think the switching of teams was a factor for him. He just didn't have a great season. He didn't live up to his contract through the first 3 quarters of his first season in Florida. And so, this is a chance for him. It's all bonus to come back and put a better foot forward. So, I mean, maybe they could be a team that surprises a little bit. I just don't know if they're ready to be a contender in the East at this point in time.
And they sold a lot at the deadline too, right? They gave away a big piece of their offense. And I don't think they were, I get they were right close to a playoff spot. You got to imagine, like, what's that going to do to they've sold a lot, and I don't know really what they could do in the East if they face off against a hot team.
Right. And Montreal sold, some players at the deadline. Chicago traded Leonard and a couple other guys. I mean, that's the weird flip side of this. All those teams on February 24th, trade deadline day, were thinking that, they're rebuilding, they're getting pieces, and now here they're going to play some playoff games. It's kind of crazy the way it's worked out.
Yep. I would say the one team I kind of have a lot of hope for the future is, kind of not to toot my own horn, but Montreal. I really like how he's shaping that core, and they're the prospects that they have could be deadly come when the time comes for them to make the jump.
So you're a Habs fan, hey Matt?
Yeah.
Wearing a Stars jersey.
I know, that's what threw me off. It was a Thrashers jersey, I think, last time we talked.
Yeah, Thrashers jersey.
Now it's the Stars jersey this time.
Yeah, I like collecting weird and interesting jerseys, and this was one I kind of saw for a decent price, and I went, okay.
Could be a Radulov Stars jersey, a little former Montreal connection.
Maybe. I could put what's his god? I could put Guy Carbonneau in this. I mean, he was a Habs great, and he did play for the Stars during this time.
Yeah, I think he might have won a cup with the Stars in '99.
He did in '99 with that weird Brent Hull goal, but no one saw the win.
Now, with the trade deadlining and signing, we also see a lot of guys that are free agents going into next year, such as maybe Braden Holtby, or Nicholas Backstrom just got signed. I was going to say him, but never mind. But could we see maybe players refusing to play until they get a new contract?
I guess it's always possible. I just don't think it's likely. I mean, it's a strange one for sure. I mean, Alex Pietrangelo, Braden Holtby. I mean, there's some big names and guys that have been paid out for this season that was, halted by COVID-19. And technically, they'll be playing after July 1st when they would have become free agents. I don't know that they will withhold their services, though. If they did so, they'd have to pay back some of the money they were paid. I think what you're going to see is have their contracts extended through whatever happens this playoff season. But it's going to be a weird time for them because I think, especially with Holtby, I mean, he knows the writing's on the wall there. Samsonov has come in and been an excellent goaltender behind him. I won't say the door is closed because I think Braden really likes playing there and, is probably willing to work with the organization. This isn't just a money decision for him. I think that there's a lifestyle aspect to this, and I'm sure his heart remains in Washington. I just don't know if they're going to have the cap space to make it work. And so, he might be going back to this tournament knowing these are his last games as a Capital. He's going to have a quick, off season to decide it. I think Petrangelo's in a similar boat in St. Louis. It's kind of weird, but I guess everyone just kind of has to go with the flow right now. I mean, we're no different in our own lives, guys, and it's just this strange summer, and these guys probably aren't going to become free agents till the end of October or the start of November.
And Braden didn't have the greatest of seasons this year, obviously following the 2018 season. Didn't have the greatest of seasons. So if he did play well, say, in the playoffs, would they maybe it wouldn't be a question anymore that he would stay if he started to pick himself up in the playoffs?
I think it's possible, and look, I want to be clear. I'm not saying he's gone for sure because, what I see there is truly, a player that spent his entire career in one place, is very comfortable there, loves the city. He and his wife have launched a charitable foundation during this period through the Capitals. I think that there's a lot of synergy there. And again, in a world without a salary cap, I think he's already re-signed. It's just, at this point that the Capitals are going to be able to go to him and say, this is all we can pay you, whatever that number is. And that's probably less than other teams would be willing to pay. And so at that point, Braden will have to make a decision for himself and his family about, does he want to stay where he's comfortable for less money? Does he want to jump into the unknown for and earn more? It's a tough call for him, but I don't sense any ill will there. I think there will be conversations and there's going to be an opportunity to stay. It's just that when everything's said and done, there's a chance it might not make sense.
Also, I think kind of the writing's on the wall for a few teams that this may be their last shot, one of them being Washington. I would think Pittsburgh, that kind of writing's on the wall for them. Maybe even Chicago and Philadelphia as well, knowing that Giroux is getting old and they may, again, knowing Giroux is getting old and a lot of Chicago's core is a lot older. So I would say that I would expect to see a lot of teams try to make a fight for it, if not or maybe just give up. I don't know what they would do.
Well, their veteran star players will understand that who knows how many more years you play. I mean, even guys like Sidney Crosby and Alex Ovechkin, they're not yet at the point we're talking about retirement, but they don't have forever. They know that they're on the back half of their careers at this point, into their 30s. And so, I think the value of each opportunity to play for the Stanley Cup gets even more important the older you get. And so, I think that while those teams might be able to find ways to stay competitive, we even saw Boston. Boston won its cup in 2011. They lost the final in 2013. They missed the playoffs a couple of years, and they've surged back and had a second wave of competitiveness with that Chara Bergeron group, Tuukka Rask and the like. I'm not going to say that any of those teams are definitely due for a total fall off, but who knows how long you have. And I think that you're going to see some of those Penguins type of teams in Washington really focus on trying to win the Stanley Cup. Other people on the outside might say it's the COVID Cup. It doesn't count. It's an asterisk. I don't think that many players are going to feel that way. And especially if you come through 4 or 5 rounds to win it, and you're going to feel like you deserve to have your name engraved in there like everyone before you.
And also, the cup has been served a million ways. It's been given to, I think Queen's University competed for it at one point. There have been amateur clubs that competed for it. For me, this is no different. And honestly, this could be a new way to test a new playoff format. It could be. You never know.
Never know. I think that we'll see wild cards in the future. I don't know if it'll be 24 teams. Maybe it's 20 teams. And so you have, 7 playing 10 and 8 playing 9 at the start of each playoffs, a little play-in series in either conference. But you're right. I mean, going to 32 teams here in the near future with Seattle joining the league, I think we're going to see more playoff teams over time than less.
Yeah. Well, because again, I'm going to again toot my own horn, but look at Montreal in 2019. They were that close to making it and they missed it because somehow I think just due to a roll of a dice, they missed it. So I think that the NHL could expand maybe to include teams that were that close but just missed it. It could be something that they could worth noting.
Well, and owners want it. You know, it's a chance to make money. It's extra games. It works for TV. You know, at the end of the day, we all love the sport of hockey purely, but this is a business, the NHL, and you know, I think that there's a lot of business reasons for doing it too. And so you're right. I do think that over time here, we'll see more teams. I don't think it's going straight back to 16 after we have 24 this summer.
All right, thank you so much for joining us. This is amazing. I hope everybody that was watching or listening got a lot of information and are now caught up on everything that all the NHL news.
Thanks, guys. It was fun, and I hope everyone out there staying well.